One day a stranger came with an offer. I will give you, blacksmith, a bag full of gold coins for a special task. On one condition, never talk to anyone about it. The blacksmith agreed. The stranger gave him a huge slab of gold and asked him to make a horseshoe with that gold. Then they went into high mountains and deep into a cave. The blacksmith could not believe his eyes. There was an army of knights sleeping in full armor. Who are they? The stranger replied, those warriors had been in deep sleep for hundreds of years. They will only wake up if it is time to fight a real great battle for the country. The stranger told the blacksmith to change the horseshoe of one of the horses. When the job was done, he paid what was promised. The blacksmith went back to his shop and, of course, he was not able to keep his word. He told his wife and friends, and then his bag full of gold coins turned into sand. The blacksmith tried to return to that cave, but he was never able to find it again. That simple and banal story has some morals that I find quite relevant for the Transatlantic Alliance today. First, military preparedness is not a luxury we can live without. We need to be ready for any eventuality. Whether we talk about military expenditure in European countries or American soldiers stationed in Europe, we need every single Eurocent and every single pair of military boots on the ground, even if the prospect of open military conflict is distant. Second, in relations across the pond, we need to keep our promises. Hold on to the goodwill established between allies after 1945. Trade, non-proliferation, regulation of a digital sphere, relations with China and Russia, peace in the Middle East. We all need a common strategy for these issues, for the whole Transatlantic Alliance, unless we want to be outvoted and outpaced by the outside world. It is as simple as that. The legend of the sleeping knights is just a legend, a fictitious account. Do we really want the alliance of liberal democracies turn into a legend, a fiction, invented story as well?
Hi, I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of The Hill in Washington, D.C., and a big fan of GlobeSec and its contributions to key discussions about global security and national security affairs. Today, our job is to talk about strengthening transatlantic cooperation in times of upheaval. I almost want to rebrand this as will transatlantic relations survive the time of upheaval, but I will leave that to my fantastic two speakers and contributors to today's forum. We have with us, of course, Foreign Minister of Slovakia, Ivan Korčok. I was just telling him he was Slovakia's former ambassador to Washington, and that everything kind of went to hell after he left town. So we'll allow him to talk about that in a moment. But also, we're very pleased to have Acting Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Philip Rieker. I've asked them both to start giving a quick snapshot of the strategic map as they see it. But I want to add one dimple to that. I want to ask them, if they were doing this same discussion 1 year ago, what has dramatically shifted? So let me start with Foreign Minister Korčok.
Yeah, thank you, dear Steve, Ambassador Rieker, dear Phil. I'm so pleased to see you because I've been so intensively in touch with you while in Washington just 5 or 6 months ago, where I had no idea that my stay will be over so soon back then. So I didn't make it just to meet you in person before I left. Actually, Philip, you might remember you were the very, very last person I spoke to on the U.S. side before I boarded the plane, by which I was flown in. in a repatriation flight in the mid of March. So it's not only a pleasure, but it's an emotional moment for me. And I know Steve for quite some time, and he indeed is a great supporter of Slovakia and Globsec. And I want to thank to Globsec also for allowing us to get into conversation over issues that are so important for us. It's very flattering, Steve, when you say that everything went to hell after I left, but I do not agree with you, because everything went to hell everywhere when I left, not only in Slovakia, in the United States, in Europe, but globally. But look, we will get over it. I'm absolutely certain. If we believe in our strength, in our values, and I think what is at stake at this moment is not only how we deal with COVID, that's in the forefront of our effort, but we have to once again defend and protect values, because they have been making us strong for so many decades. You asked us as well to share sort of strategic outlook with our viewers, and best regards to them as well, to all of them who are joining us for this session. But before that, could I very quickly just say that what keeps me busy at this very moment as we speak, there are three things basically, or three important issues. Number one, Belarus, and I'd be more than happy to share with our audience how we view the recent developments, which basically is followed by entire world. I think I will not exaggerate when I say so. Number two, recovery from COVID. That's the issue which is number one on top of the list in Slovakia and within European Union, and then COVID itself. So Belarus, what is happening there right now, and Slovak government has made the point very, very clear, is unacceptable, because we've seen basically the regime oppressing people who are not asking for anything but what is the very essence of democracy, that their voice is heard and not ignored. We've seen in manipulated and falsified elections, and this is unacceptable, and therefore our position is clear and strengthened by a unified position of 27 member states, that we do not recognize the outcome of these elections. Number two, a response has to come. And we in the European Union have made it clear we will introduce and impose sanctions individually, targeting individuals on Belarusian side, individuals who are responsible for both manipulating and the elections and also for the violence against protesters. And number three, we want to mobilize support for the civic society in Belarus. So that we in Slovakia decided, for example, that we will invite students that can complete or start their studies in Slovakia. Many of them have lost basically their places in a school. So it's a response, it's a clear position that we are having vis-a-vis Belarus, and it's this support that we want to provide to people in Belarus. Two, and I will wrap up that point on Belarus. If there is an interest, I can say more. Slovakia is part of Troika of OSCE. We had the chairmanship last year. Now we are together, member of so-called Troika, together with the current chairmanship, which is Albania, and the incoming presidency, which is Sweden. I do see a role for OSCE, basically with the view to do our utmost through an inclusive organization, which is OSCE, to stop escalation in Belarus, to protect people, but above all to start a dialogue between regime and the civic society and political representatives of Belarusians. So I'm absolutely ready to actively be engaged in that process. Number two, EU and recovery. I don't want to take in my intro too much of my time. Right. This is the issue number one in Europe. We need to recover because the impact is severe on all economies in the world, including in Slovakia. But we see it in addition to what we want to achieve, recovering economy, also modernize our society. And COVID still keeps us busy in Slovakia. We've been doing extremely well compared to other nations struggling with the virus. But now, obviously, we have entered a second wave. So as I speak right now, we are introducing restrictive measures to protect our people. I don't know, Steve, whether after those 3 points, which, as I said, keep us busy in Slovakia, but I'm certain in the United States as well, should I immediately start with the strategic outlook, or should I pass on to Philip so that I
why don't we check in with Ambassador Rieker, and we'll come back and we can go back and forth, if that's okay with you. Philip, give us your map and your priorities right now. What's burning on your desk?
Well, thanks, Stephen, and Ivan, great to see you too. Hello to everyone at GlobeSec. Wish we were together in Bratislava, or even better in the Tatras. But it's terrific that we've all learned to use these platforms and the technology to maintain this kind of dialogue, particularly important in the transatlantic relationship. And of course, that's what I focus on, is our relationship with 50 countries that the Bureau of European Affairs focuses on, our 79 diplomatic posts abroad, our travel and engagement, which is starting up again slowly, but COVID being the big focus. That's the biggest difference, of course, between now and a year ago. We've all had to adjust to the pandemic, and we're looking at recovery. The most important part of that is going to be doing that together with a transatlantic economic and investment relationship in the trillions of dollars. That's going to be key for all of us, getting our economies restarted again, and also focusing on resilience. What did we learn from the pandemic? What steps do we need to take to be able to deal with this in the future, even as the unfolding of the pandemic spikes and potential new waves are things we've got to contend with, hoping to open up travel again, but mindful of the epidemiology and the challenges we face there on a consular basis as we look at it, taking care of our citizens, whether it was repatriating them by the tens of thousands, and now trying to get business and tourism and educational travel up and going again. Ivan mentioned some of the key things on the agenda right now. Belarus very much in the focus. Deputy Secretary of State Steve Biegun traveling in the region. He was in Moscow yesterday. He's in Ukraine today after a very good visit in Vilnius, Lithuania, very much focused on the problems in Belarus and our support for the Belarusian people. They just celebrated their Independence Day yesterday, and it reminds us of our strong support, which we share across the Atlantic, for the sovereignty and independence of Belarus, but also for the people of Belarus to have a government that delivers for them. We, of course, are focused still on the challenges posed by Russia, posed by China also in Europe, and we've been having increasing dialogue, including in Central Europe, where I traveled with Secretary Pompeo just a couple of weeks ago. A year ago, in 2019, we were in Slovakia, in Bratislava. Then Ambassador to the United States, Korczak, was able to join us on that visit. We reprised that a little later than we'd hoped, but including this time Prague, Slovenia, Vienna, and Poland, reminding us that our dialogue with Europe spreads from traditional partners, of course, Paris, Berlin, London, but also to our colleagues and allies in Central Europe. So a lot on the agenda, and very pleased to be doing so much with colleagues like Ivan out of Bratislava and groups like GlobeSec, which are supportive.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ambassador Rieker. And I know, recently you were in Poland. I know that U.S. is adding 1,000 new forces to rotational forces there. So there are these elements and ornaments, if you will, of American engagement in the world. But as Foreign Minister Korczak comments about the strategic outlook, one of the topics we've had in GlobeSec before is whether America was sort of in a strategic contraction mode. When you see G7 leaders, particularly European leaders, say they'd rather not attend a G7 summit. There's sort of reflection of, some turbulence out there in the relationship that I want to make sure that we get in our conversation. So I'm going to just ask it on the front end. As you share your strategic outlook, Foreign Minister Korczak, I'd also like to get a sense of whether you see America robustly engaged, sort of steady state, or slipping back. Foreign Minister?
Well, you would not expect me to directly respond with exactly your words, but in a 30 seconds, I come back just for a second back to Belarus, because I forgot to mention one important thing when talking about Belarus. Of course, what matters is what we see on the ground. That's decisive. But at the same time, we cannot ignore that a propaganda and disinformation war is underway as well in parallel. And we in Central Europe realize it may be a bit more than our partners in the West, in the West of Europe or in the United States. But we see how much the conspiratory scene and those who are spreading propaganda and disinformation are active right now. And today I had a conference I just wanted to tell you, because I believe it is our duty to communicate with the broad audience in Slovakia and Central Europe to make clear that, you know, those who are spreading disinformation, they are using a very targeted language and slogans in order to really disorientate people and question the fundamental pillars of our foreign policies. And there are 5 slogans that we in Slovakia have identified in that propaganda war. Number 1, Maidanization, with a clear reference to what we've seen 2014 in Ukraine. Number 2, it's Lukashenko himself, but others as well joining him in spreading basically the news that NATO was mobilizing troops and moving them throughout the Baltic countries and in Poland, which we all know is not true. Number 3, protesters are being paid from abroad, and therefore basically there is a third party involvement in that. Belarus will turn into, I quote what we are hearing in Slovakia, into a NATO's or European Union's colony. And number 5, the 5th slogan with which the propaganda is working, that protesters are using fascist symbols, because we see really the white flag being used, and we should speak to our people and say it is the old flag, and under this flag Lukashenko was sworn in back in 1994. So once again, I wanted to make this point as well. We shouldn't forget that while trying to help stabilize the situation, help Belarusian people to express their wishes freely. Right. There is also this propaganda war underway. And now back to your questions, Steve. This is the question that I was asking myself when I was still in the United States. What can we do with our transatlantic relations? We no doubt that we've been in recent years, and I'm not referring only to the 4 years under the President Trump administration, we've been going through a very difficult test of resilience of our bond. But basically, when speaking on behalf of Slovakia, I want to make one point clear. Strong transatlantic relation, this bond, is the very essence of a foreign policy doctrine in Slovakia. We see no alternative to it, because it is based on how we experience transatlantic relationship and bond, and the role the United States has played since we regained freedom in 1989. Nor we see any other alternative under these circumstances when we see how rapidly the world is changing. I believe we should see completely different and contrary movement to each other to get us closer to each other when we really look at the challenges that we are facing globally. So number 1, there is no alternative. Number 2, if we want to maintain it, we have to recognize that indeed there are diverging views between the United States and Europe, or rather European Union. You can see it when it comes to how we deal with such phenomena like climate change. You can see it when it took us a bit more time in Europe to recognize what rise of China will mean globally, what kind of phenomenon China represents with its growing power. We too have recognized that Russia is an assertive player on the one hand, and we do disagree with them on many issues. On the other hand, we need to engage with Russia because it is a player whom we need to engage when we want to resolve other important international issues. Technological progress. It took us again a while in Europe, I recognize, to recognize what, for example, introduction of 5G would mean when it comes to, the level of dependence on this technology and how to make sure that it will not represent a threat to our security. A conflict, the protracted conflicts globally, be it in Middle East or elsewhere in the southern periphery of European Union. We have clear position on that, but we have to recognize that there are countries like Russia and others, and we have to engage with them. And last but not least, when talking about transatlantic tensions, I would put it directly with this word, the relationship between the United States and Europe. It is a subject of my concern because when I was, and that's, I mean, it's obvious, it's public, that my concern when I was still in the United States was that on the US side, we very often have heard that the EU is not maybe its closest partner, but rather its opponent. Sometimes we have heard, let's say, the description of European Union that we are rival, that we are an enemy. I want to make clear transatlantic relationship can only be improved if we improve substantially a relationship between the United States and Europe. What should happen in order to make sure that the relationship will be maintained? Dear Steve and Philip, I believe we are desperately lacking what I call a strategic dialogue being established between European Union and the United States. No doubt that this strategic dialogue is taking place permanently and constantly within NATO, but there are many issues that can only be dealt with and addressed between the United States and European Union. Take, for example, trade. This was a very hot irritant in our relationship that can only be dealt with when we sit down and discuss this issue between the United States and European Union. Two, I believe, Phil, and this is my invitation, why don't we establish something like a regular, at least twice a year, a meeting between a Secretary of State and us European ministers. It shouldn't be, just on ad hoc basis when Secretary of State from time to time is spending his layover time when he's flying somewhere. I believe we should have the framework that we are having, at least within NATO. I believe it would help. Otherwise, I think a sort of strategic decoupling could continue, because I don't think when we discuss intensively, at length, in details, in depth, issues of strategic importance, we will better understand each other. We will better understand what is the U.S. position to Iran. We will better understand why the United States has taken position on climate change, why unilateral decisions are sometimes, better option for the U.S. than multilateral options that we are seeking. So that's my point.
Well, let me jump in, and as Ambassador Rieker shares his strategic map, let me ask him if he wants to add another inbox and outbox on his desk, and would you respond to the minister's call for a more structured and more ever-present, ongoing strategic dialogue of the foreign ministers of Europe with the United States? So, Ambassador Rieker?
Steve, it's a question that comes up a lot, as you know, in discussions here in the think tank community. We have a very active dialogue with Europe. How do you define Europe is always the challenge. There's the European Union, the Commission, the Council. Right now, the Germans have the presidency of that. We've been working with Germany on a number of issues that they've taken great leadership on, from the Eastern Mediterranean to Belarus. And we just have a very active agenda that's been challenged by COVID, and yet we've continued to have that kind of engagement. You know, Secretary Pompeo participated at a meeting of the FAC, the Foreign Affairs Council, with all 27 EU foreign ministers virtually. We've been trying to schedule that in person. COVID made that and travel difficult, but we did that virtually. We've talked about trying to do that again. We've been pleased to accept High Representative Borrell's invitation to have a US-EU dialogue on China, which I think will be very important. We're hoping we can kick that off after people get back sometime in September. And that'll be an ongoing thing. These aren't one-offs. These are things where we have lots of things to talk about. We share so much in terms of the trade and investment agenda, in terms of security. Obviously, NATO, as Ivan mentioned, very robust. For all of the neuralgia, the discussions, the differences over the last few years, NATO is actually stronger than it has been. It's got its force posture developing. It's got command structures. It's taken on China. It's taken on the new threats like hybrid and cyber challenges. These are the kinds of things that Ivan alluded to when he talked about disinformation. One of the things we have agreed with European partners is a real challenge, whether it's Russian disinformation or efforts to change the narrative, to rewrite history and revise the end of World War II. These are things that we've tried to focus on in our travels as well. That's why it's important to go to places, why Secretary Pompeo wanted to go to Pilsen and commemorate the Allied liberation of Czechoslovakia. Why last year we were in Bratislava to commemorate 1989, 30 years, of course, since the fall of the wall, since the end of the Cold War, but also look at the new challenges that we have. Some of them brought about by technology, some of them brought about by changes in the global structure. The EU has enlarged and expanded. We saw that very much in the recent EU summit that focused on the next 7 years of budget, as well as the funding for COVID recovery, the changing roles of countries within the EU. Brexit, of course, is something that we have had to all adjust to. We continue to support EU and enlargement for countries, say, in the Western Balkans that have seen Euro-Atlantic integration as key for their better future. And we continue to be very busy on that. Last year, we added North Macedonia, the 30th ally to NATO, and they are well on their way with our support from the United States, but also so many countries in the European Union to moving toward membership in the European Union. So I think there is a great dialogue going on there. We can always look at new mechanisms in which to do that. But those who sort of say, well, the transatlantic relationship is fatally challenged, I think are wrong. We can have differences of opinion, like any family does, but those don't have to be divisions. Our strategic competitors love to try to divide us. They love to try to divide the European Union itself among its 27 member states, which have their own differences, obviously, and tough debates. That's fine, that's healthy, but that doesn't have to mean that our differences or even disputes turn into true divisions. What we have is something that certainly for 75 years and in many ways far longer than that, based on a shared set of fundamental values. The concept of the West is what we very much are focused on. And we have to adjust and adapt that to changing times, changing challenges.
Let me just jump in here, and I should mention that we just have a very few minutes left because we're going to have a couple of questions come in for both of you, and then I know the minister has to run. But let me just ask, what I heard the foreign minister saying is, we need a little bit more. We need an opportunity to shave and shape some of these challenges on a more regular basis. And Philip, what I'm hearing from you is we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot already, and we may not want to do more. So my question is, if right now we see a gap between both of you, and both of you understand each other, where they're coming from, why not add on another platform that might give that opportunity to strengthen a more cohesive way with other voices Is there some reason America doesn't want to do that? Let me ask the ambassador that and then jump back to Minister Korchak.
No, absolutely. Very, very precisely formulated question. And I've been making my notes while Philip was speaking. Number one, I have to tell how much I agree with him when he said that NATO has done a lot recently. I entirely agree that NATO is now better off than it was a few years ago. For example, this rebalancing, which is a very complex issue, but in Europe, I dare say, and I can say it on the record and publicly, there is no question, no hesitation anymore present that we have to spend more money if we want to still rely on collective defense, which is guaranteed through Article 5. It's not a controversial issue anymore, and that happened in recent years, and that happened also because of the high pressure, if you want, which we were exposed to from Washington. So no doubt about it, forced posture within NATO, a clear U.S. support, which I want to appreciate, for strengthening collective defense as a response to aggression by Russia in Ukraine. I mean, no doubt about that. So I agree, transatlantic relationship is challenged, but it's not fatally, so to say, damaged. Not at all. Philip is also right, by the way, because I've been serving in the European Union as ambassador for 6 years. So I can tell you we are so complicated, and therefore Philip is right when he asks, but to whom should we speak? Because you have Commission, you have Council, you have European Parliament. What I'm calling for, Philip, is that we establish a really regular and strategic dialogue on the political level, and here I mean Secretary of State of the United States regularly meeting with us, ministers of foreign affairs, because I believe, and we've seen that recently, 2 months ago, or when was it, when we had a chance to meet with Secretary Pompeo, it makes sense really to engage in that open dialogue. And I know that there is readiness in Washington for that. Otherwise, we either stick together or our strategic competitors will be pleased, and we must prevent that with all means that we're having.
Let me ask Ambassador Rieker to jump in and respond, and then I think we're going to bring a question in. Ambassador Rieker?
Great. No, I think Ivan is absolutely on the right track. The kinds of engagements and dialogues we have, sometimes you do have to break things down. So a dialogue on China, I think, is very well called for. We're moving ahead with that. And as I said, that's something that is not a one-off iteration. There's a lot of things to talk about there. What have we learned in terms of the COVID crisis and recovery from that? What about reciprocity? Things like the 5G issues and dealing with new technologies, those have gotten a lot of attention. The fundamental issue there is simply what we've learned and realized we were late to the game in terms of some of the threats and challenges from China in that sector, and wanting to share that with our friends and allies and help them understand what we all need to be aware of in terms of Chinese activities. We have lots of avenues for that kind of broad dialogue. We have, in case nobody's noticed, an election coming up in the United States in a few weeks. And however that turns out, we will have, after January, either a second Trump administration or a Biden administration. And those are then the next steps we'll have to take in moving with that. We have a full calendar of engagements. As I said, the Secretary was just in Europe. I expect he'll be there again before long. The Deputy Secretary is there. And I was just on the phone yesterday with counterparts from the EU. So we have the phone number, or phone numbers might be the better way to put it. Lots of contacts, and one of the ones I appreciate the most is the Foreign Minister of Slovakia, Ivan Korchak.
Right. So, Ambassador, what I'm hearing from you is we're not going to do this right now. We'll think about it, right?
We're gonna keep all those channels open, Steve, and certainly keep the dialogue going.
Great.
Lots of things on the agenda.
Excellent. Let me ask. I think we've got a question lined up. Let me get at least one question in now.
Yes, hi, it's Steve Erlanger. I'm with the New York
Hey, Stephen.
Times.
Great. Good to see
How are
you.
you? Good to see you too. I have a question for Ambassador Rieker. In 1996, Phil, which was one of the last times Greece and Turkey nearly went to war, Richard Holbrooke came rushing in to try to de-escalate. What, may I ask, is the United States doing now to try to de-escalate the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean? Or is it just happy to let Germany take the lead? Thank you.
Great question, Stephen, and great to see you. I'm going to ask both of you because Turkey is a NATO member, you're allied, and how are we going to handle Turkey? Ambassador Rieker?
No, it's a great question, Steve. Great to see you too, even at this distance. I think you're aware that we've been engaged, the Secretary of State, with both our allies, Greece and Turkey. When he was traveling in Central Europe, he met with the Greek Foreign Minister, Dendias, in Vienna. A couple days later with the Turkish Foreign Minister. Our ambassadors in both countries are very engaged. You mentioned the Germans. They have been playing an important role in their, not only as Germany, of course, an ally in NATO with both of those countries, but also as president in their presidency of the European Union this semester. They need to have a dialogue. They need to keep talking. That's always been the solution. Richard Holbrooke would have said that too. He knew well the importance of diplomacy and engagement. I think a lot of that, as we're learning, like in forums like this, can take place perhaps less in the public eye and with major trips or travel, but the conversations and urging both sides to be careful in what they do, what they say, to remember the importance of our alliance and that they do have channels for communication. I think both countries, right. Egypt and Greece and Turkey, know that, and the Mediterranean is a tough place. It's got a long and complicated history, but we're continuing to work on that.
Thank you. Foreign Minister Korczak, I'm going to give you the last word, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. But as you close, I follow you on Twitter, and you had a powerful picture on Twitter the other day of the Belarusian ambassador to Slovakia seeing you as he departed his post because he had resigned to align himself with the opposition, with the people who are raising questions, of course, about leadership in the election in Belarus. I'd like you to do this, but just as we close, I'd love to get your thoughts about that, because that seemed to me a very brave thing he was doing, but it's also you were holding that up as a moment of leadership that mattered to you. So in our final couple of minutes, I'd love to get a snapshot of both Turkey and that.
Well, on Turkey, of course, we are absolutely concerned over what we've seen recently in the East Mediterranean area. The European Union and Slovakia as a part of it, we've been dealing with that issue. I mean, within all recent foreign affairs councils that we have had, we will be dealing with that issue as well tomorrow in Berlin. Our position is clear. We've been expressing our solidarity with Cyprus and Greece. Their sovereignty has to be respected in view of continuing drilling in the exclusive economic zones. And number two, we too view Turkey as an important partner, and I want to say it's an ally. I mean, Turkey is not just a partner; it's an ally of strategic importance. It's an ally within NATO, and therefore the only solution, and that's the moment for diplomacy, and therefore I absolutely support all attempts and engagements as those, for example, that we've seen by Germany recently. Unfortunately, it didn't work immediately, but I know Heiko Maas, who was here in Bratislava last Friday, I think the other day he was also in Athens recently, but I'm absolutely certain that political responsibility and engagement in this combination, I think, will lead us to really scaling down the escalation, which is not a pleasant thing that we've seen recently.
Right.
And number two, with the ambassador of Belarus, who has been serving in Slovakia for 4 years. Well, indeed, this is extraordinary move. We are diplomats, both Phil and me, and my comment was basically that his own story confirms that even diplomats are from time to time reaching really red lines. And they recognize that, this red line was crossed by, in this case, by his own government, and it does not allow him anymore to serve his own country as a diplomat. But it was a courageous move, which has deserved a lot of respect in Slovakia and Belarus. He left, I think, yesterday, physically, Slovakia. He's on his way to Belarus. And we told him whenever he believes he wants to re-engage with us, whatever he needs, we will support him. But that was something, which only confirms how serious the situation is in Belarus, and that's why it is so high on our agenda these days.
Well, listen, we're going to have to end it there, but I want to thank both of you for your candor and also for putting some edgy ideas on the table of how to restore transatlantic cooperation, build it better than it has been. Thank you for the seriousness that you gave this. So I want to thank Foreign Minister Ivan Korczak, of course, of Slovakia, Ambassador Philip Rieker, Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs. It's been a real pleasure. And I want to tell everyone to stay tuned. The next session is Trend, the Trend section, Disruption as Central Europe's Accelerator for Deep Economic Overhaul. So stay tuned for that session. But thank you both very much.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Globe.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Philip. Bye-bye. See you soon, I hope.
Well, I think that from what I have seen, GlobeSec has convened a very impressive group of people that are subject matter experts on our most pressing global